To catch a traitor, Flynn and I were required to play the one part we had spent several months carefully avoiding. A devoted married couple sharing a suite.
In a world of stolen naval plans and silent meals, the most dangerous thing in the room was not the target. It was the closed door between us.
Maud West, private inquirer, licensed, discreet, and, as of a wet Wednesday afternoon in October, in possession of a hotel booking she did not make, a cover identity she did not choose, and a connecting door she had not yet decided what to do about. The Ashworths of Suite 312.
The mission was uncomplicated on paper. Herr Doktor Emil Kesler, officially a man of science attending a medical conference at the Savoy, unofficially a man who had been quietly arranging the transfer of stolen naval blueprints to parties in Vienna. Scotland Yard wanted him surveilled without alarming him. Inspector Miller had decided that a couple of means, installed in the suite adjoining his, would accomplish what a plainclothes officer alone could not. Flynn arrived at my office at 3:30 with his hat in his hand, and his jaw set at the angle that means he has already been told something he does not care for.
It's a delicate business, Maud. The Yard can't get a man inside without spooking the target. Kesler is too twitchy. Miller says we need a Darby and Joan act, a couple of leisure, not a copper looking for a fight.
I poured the tea. I allowed a suitable pause. And you thought of me?
Miller thought of you. I agreed it was sensible.
The word sensible was doing a considerable amount of work in that sentence. Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth, I take it. A gentleman of leisure and his devoted wife. One suite.
2 bedrooms, connecting. It's a bit thick, I know, but Miller says...
I am perfectly familiar with what Miller says. Very well, Flynn. But if I am to be Mrs. Ashworth, I expect you to play a man who is at least tolerably fond of his wife, not a copper in a dinner jacket. He cleared his throat. He looked at the window. He said nothing, which was as close to agreement as Flynn generally gets on short notice. I watched him. His jaw was set tight enough to crack. We had established a rhythm across the last 2 cases, a professional distance that kept things orderly. This assignment was a direct blow to that particular arrangement, and we were both aware of it, and neither of us was going to say so. I finished my tea. I told him to be at the Savoy entrance at 7. He left without the biscuit I had put out for him, which I noted.
The roles are cast. The stage is the Savoy. As the Ashworths collect their key at the 3rd floor desk, they discover that the most difficult part of the performance is not the one they play for the target. We return for Act 2.
The Savoy stands like a fortress of electric light against the London fog. The lamps throw long shadows down the approach, sharp-edged against the wet stone, then swallowed by the dark. To the world we are the Ashworths returning from a tedious dinner. To the man watching from the shadows near the entrance, we are a couple of means, nothing more. Flynn handed me out of the car. His palm was cold. I could feel it through my glove.
Steady on, Maud, the porter is watching. Don't look at the mezzanine.
Oh, darling. I am far too exhausted to look at anything but a glass of sherry and a soft pillow. Do see that they are careful with my vanity case. Flynn's idea of devoted husband is a man who speaks in clipped sentences and stiffens when his wife takes his arm. I leaned into him as we crossed the lobby, enough to feel the wool of his dinner jacket against my shoulder. He went rigid as a fence post. If I hadn't known better, I should have thought he was about to arrest the concierge.
God, that collar. I feel as though I am being garroted by my own laundry. I don't know how these men of leisure stand it.
You played the part well enough, though your darling sounds rather like a court summons. Try to relax the jaw. You are supposed to be in love, not under interrogation. He walked to the centre of the parlour. It was a masterpiece of gold leaf and heavy brocade, and he looked utterly out of place in it, which was the correct response to a room like that. Then his eyes went to the connecting door. It stood in the corner of the room. Dark mahogany, polished brass fittings, perfectly ordinary. We both looked at it for a moment with the careful neutrality of two people not looking at a thing. Flynn cleared his throat.
About the door. I think it best we keep it bolted. On both sides. We are here as the Ashworths. But once those doors are shut, we are simply two operatives on a job. Scrupulously correct. It keeps things simple.
He was looking at me, but his eyes were searching for an exit. There was a warmth in the room that had nothing to do with the radiator. Scrupulously correct. Of course, Flynn. I would not dream of anything else. The joke and the ache, simultaneously. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the clock tick, and did not examine the feeling. The morning light at the Savoy is unforgiving. It falls through the high windows in sharp bars across the white linen, catching the steam from the tea service and making it visible. I watched the room through the reflection in my silver pot. Kesler was at the corner table, a man waiting for a signal, buried in a sea of marmalade and polite indifference. You really must try the kippers, dear. They are quite excellent this morning.
I am more concerned with the gentleman by the pillar, the one in the charcoal suit. He has not looked at his newspaper in 10 minutes.
I kept my eyes on my teacup. I found the man in the mirror of the silver pot. He was well dressed and still in the way of someone accustomed to waiting. Look at the tables, Flynn. Not at him, at the pattern. Kesler, the man in charcoal, the waiter by the sideboard. Every time the waiter moves to clear a plate, the charcoal suit shifts his chair. It is a rotation. They are managing sightlines. Flynn said nothing. He looked, in the way Flynn looks at things, without moving his head, without any visible change of expression, with his entire attention. Then he turned a page of his newspaper.
You are right. We are close.
It is one of Flynn's more agreeable qualities. He concedes the point when the point is correct. He does it without ceremony, which I appreciate. We could not remain in the suite all afternoon without attracting notice. To the hotel staff, a couple who refuses to take the air on a dry October afternoon is a couple with something to hide. We walked in the Embankment gardens. Flynn was rigid with professional anxiety, which he was attempting to disguise as a leisurely stroll. He was not succeeding. I took his arm. Walk a little slower, Flynn. You are pacing as if we are heading for a crime scene.
The man in charcoal was seen near the underground station 12 minutes ago. He is working his way back toward the hotel. Whatever is happening tonight, the pieces are assembling.
Look at the bench near the statue. Do not turn your head. There were two men reading the Standard. They were not reading it. Flynn pressed my hand against his side, a signal, not an affection, though the gesture was indistinguishable from the outside. Watchers, but whose? Kesler's, or the Yard's?
At this distance, it is impossible to say. It means the game has moved beyond the hotel. We are being measured.
We walked on. The fog was beginning to come in off the Thames, softening the edges of things. Flynn did not loosen his arm. I did not remove mine. Neither of us remarked upon it. The conference dinner filled the ballroom with amber light and deep shadow. Kesler was at table 12, laughing too loudly at something that was not amusing, the laugh of a man managing his nerves in public.
He is too comfortable. If we stay by the sideboard, he will spot us.
Then let us give him something else to look at. You have been promising me a dance all evening, Flynn. Do not be a bounder. I led him onto the floor before he could object. Flynn dances the way Flynn does everything, correctly, stiffly, with the expression of a man fulfilling an obligation. His hand on my waist was scrupulously correct. Then the orchestra swelled and we began to move, and he was rather better at it than he had led me to believe. Look past my shoulder. Every rotation gives us a fresh angle.
I see the man in the white tuxedo. He is working toward the orchestra, watching the gaps between the dancers.
I saw the pattern complete itself. The cloakroom. The transfer is happening now.
Then let us conclude this dance, Mrs. Ashworth.
We will pause there for a moment. If you are listening to MicroPulse, we would very much like to know where you are and what the hour is. Wherever in the world you happen to be tuning in, leave it in the comments. Your location, your hour, your corner of things. Every note you leave helps this community along, and we read everyone. Now, back to the Savoy.
We slipped away from the floor as the waltz concluded. The cloakroom corridor was all deep shadow and harsh overhead globes. At the far end, Kesler stood at the counter. He was speaking in a low voice to the man in the white tuxedo. The same man whose eyes had been like flint across the breakfast room that morning. I watched the transaction. It was subtle and swift. Kesler placed a heavy overcoat across the counter. The man in the tuxedo slid a black leather ledger into the interior pocket and made to lift it away. The ledger is in the left breast pocket. Proceed.
Scotland Yard. Stand where you are, Kesler. This has been a most unfortunate lapse in judgment.
Kesler's response I shall render charitably, as a protest of innocence. Flynn's answer to it was to reach into the coat and close his fingers around the ledger. The ledger is not 52 pages, Flynn.
No, but it is rather heavier than that.
It was done. The plans were secured. The crown was protected. Kesler was conveyed to a cell before midnight. The man in the charcoal suit, his contact, whose name I shall leave to Flynn's report, was collected from the underground station at 11:30 by 2 of Miller's men.
The Savoy, a suite on the 3rd floor. The mission concluded. The ledger in a vault, Kesler in a cell, and 2 people who had spent 3 days being married to each other now required to spend 1 more night being nothing of the sort. The connecting door was still there. On both sides, the bolt was drawn.
The mission was technically concluded. The correct course of action was sleep. I was not sleeping. I stood by the window and watched the moonlight move across the carpet. I had a perfectly adequate view of the hotel's side entrance, which was my stated reason for occupying this room. I was not watching the side entrance. I was listening to the silence from the other side of the mahogany door. I reached for the handle. I stopped. The hunt was over. We were back to being a detective inspector and a private inquirer who happened to share a wall. That was the correct position. I returned to it. I did not sleep for some considerable time.
I was sitting on the edge of the bed. The bolt on the connecting door is polished brass and cold to the touch. I knew this because I had touched it when I first came in to slide it home. It is a simple mechanism, a lever. It moves in one direction or the other. Last night, it had been a tactical boundary. Tonight, with the mission concluded and the silence pressing in from both sides of the wall, it felt rather more like a question. One we were not, at present, permitted to answer. I sat with that for a while. Then I put out the light and lay down and listened to the clock, and did not examine the feeling, and eventually slept.
We were seated at a linen-draped table made for 4. I sat at one end. Maud sat at the side, leaving the corner chair between us entirely vacant. The chair where our marriage had sat only the previous evening. The one we had leaned across to watch Kesler. The one where we had been, briefly, something other than what we are. That empty chair felt rather wider than the Atlantic. The Kipper run was on time at least. We shall be back at the office by 10.
Indeed. Back to reality, Flynn. All performances must eventually end.
I wanted to say something about the door, about the fact that I had never actually drawn the bolt on my side. But it would have been an unfortunate lapse in professional poise, and I could not find the sentence in any case.
You were very convincing as a husband, Flynn.
And you as a wife, Maud. We played the parts to the letter.
Yes. scrupulously correct. The interior of the cab was cramped in the manner of London cabs, which is to say, it was designed for a city that expects its passengers to be uncomfortable. We were sitting close enough to feel the warmth of each other's overcoats. We were back to being two separate professional entities. Both things were simultaneously true.
I shall have the report on the Commissioner's desk by noon. I have noted that the ledger was not 52 pages, as originally believed.
Good. And the man in the charcoal suit?
Handled. He will find the Yard's hospitality rather less comfortable than the Savoy's.
Flynn looked out the window. The rain was making the London morning into something abstract. Grey shapes between grey buildings, the light catching the wet stone and then losing it again. He did not look at me.
We are here.
So we are. He had his hand on the door handle but did not pull it.
Will you be taking another case immediately, Maud? Or do you require a rest?
A private inquirer's rent does not pay itself with rest, Flynn.
No, of course not. It was a peculiar state of affairs these last few days.
It was.
Until the next briefing, then.
Goodbye, Flynn. He opened the door. I stepped out. Behind me, I heard him, quietly, as the door was closing, almost to himself.
Goodbye, Mrs. Ashworth.
I did not turn around. The office was cold, the air smelling of old paper and the particular staleness of a room that has been left to itself for 3 days. I stood by the window and watched the cab disappear towards Great Russell Street. For 3 days I had lived in a suite at the Savoy, slept in silk, eaten kippers at a table that looked onto the Thames, and conducted a sustained performance of domesticity with a man who treats a walk in the park as a tactical exercise, and whose idea of a tender endearment is steady on. We secured the plans. We protected the crown. We also danced rather well together, which I shall not be including in my report. There is a connecting door in Suite 312 at the Savoy. On my side, the bolt was drawn from the moment we arrived. I do not know with any certainty what was done on the other side. I think I know. I have chosen not to confirm it. There is a category of mystery that is not meant to be solved, only attended to, carefully, and set aside. Like a locked door in a suite one no longer inhabits. The kettle came to the boil. I hung my coat, I made the tea. Until the next inquiry, I remain. Maud West, Private Inquirer.
You've been listening to the case files of Maud West. Tonight's episode, The Ashworths of Suite 312. Join us next time when another truth waits to be brought to light by whoever is patient enough and honest enough to go looking for it.